I know everybody's so anxious for the results and there's such great nervous energy, but the results are in. Mother-in-law of the year does not go to Margaret from Kindred under any circumstances. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. You know, I kind of was going out on a limb there because technically they are not married in Kindred, so Margaret could not actually win the Mother-in-Law of the Year award yet in that movie, but they were planning on getting married, so I did do an overreach on that. But look, when it comes to Kindred, it's an independent horror movie, and now would be just a perfect time for you to support an independent horror movie right in the middle of this here pandemic, so I hope you go see Kindred. And in today's episode, we are interviewing Jason McColgan, the co-writer, and co-writer-director Joe Marcantonio. And what's really cool about these guys, as you'll hear, they are podcast listeners who have been listening for years, who are now in the podcast, and that's always fun to have. That always means a lot to me to be able to do interviews like that. I think we just had Brian Duffield, so I think this would make them 25th or 26th for all the podcast listeners who have then become filmmakers and made it into the podcast. If my count's right, and I'm sorry if it's not. But nonetheless, congrats to Joe and to Jason on this accomplishment. And look, they made a good movie. It's a creepy ass little movie, and it's got a lot of style to it and an interesting story as well. And they were very good about talking about their creative challenges. So I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. That's right, you could read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app. And if you've never read us before, test drive us. You could read our free issue over there at backstory.net or through the iPad app. And, you know, we're one of the only magazines in the world that publishes a screenplay that we dig by a screenwriter and then does an in-depth interview with them about it. We also interview actors, directors, producers, editors. There's storytelling is our theme, as I'm sure you know by now at Backstory. So I hope you check us out. It is a little bit of a challenge to run a film magazine during a pandemic when films are not in theaters, but there are still new releases just like this that are coming straight on your VOD, and we're staying in it. So your support means everything to us. If you want to subscribe, I'll give you a coupon code SAVE5. That's the numbers. That's the word save and the number 5 over at backstory.net. And your login credentials will still get you into the iPad as well. Look, it's great for you to consider supporting my passion project. So thanks for considering subscribing to backstory.net. But now, without any further ado, let's get right into our interview with Jason McColgan and Joe Marcantonio to talk about their film, Kindred. Joe, Jason, welcome. How you guys doing over there?
Good. Yeah? I think we're pretty good, all things considered.
Are you kids up late? Is that what's going on?
Yeah, man. It's like 9 p.m., if that counts as late.
Wow. You got special permission from the parents to stay up that late. That's
we are both depressingly old. So
we got permission from our wives.
That's good. Well, and you guys were podcast listeners before as well, is that right?
Yeah, man. Like, we are from the old creative screenwriting podcast days. Mm-hmm. So we're talking
going way back.
I mean, more than 10 years.
Yeah.
I mean, we go back a long way. So yeah, we've listened to a lot of hours of your voice, Jeff. You've got big expectations coming from us.
That's good. Well, I think this makes you guys the 23rd or 24th podcast listeners to make it into the podcast. So congrats on that.
And also, we have been to a live podcast in London.
Oh yeah. Oh yes. That's right.
We went to the Prince Charles and saw you speak to Sir Alan Parker about Angel Heart.
That was awesome.
That was 3 years ago or something?
Yeah, that was so much fun, and he just passed away. And like,
yeah. So I actually met him like about a year before your thing. I made a little documentary about Volkswagen advertising, and he used to work in advertising. So my dad vaguely knew him, a bit random. So I wrote him an email out of the blue, hoping that he'd come and be interviewed, and he did. And then after I finished, he was like trying to go for lunch. So I did actually spend a lunch with him once as well, and he was super cool, man. He's a really good guy, and I like a bit of a hero of mine. I thought his work was amazing. So
yeah, mine too. It bums me out. It bums me out. I learned recently that you could kickstart events and like on Kickstarter and raise money for them. And I wish I knew that 2 years ago, because this is going to sound crazy, but Alan Parker enjoyed doing that interview enough that we were trying to figure out a way to get him out to Los Angeles to do like a week's worth of his films or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he was totally fine with it. But, you know, I can't ask him to fly himself out there and put himself up in a hotel. And I was reaching out to organizations and literally I couldn't get the needle moving with anybody. I'm like, are you guys crazy?
What a shame.
Like we would have done all the films, but I was so glad that I did Angel Heart. And I love that films. And that's so great that you guys were there because that was actually a really fun night. Well, so as you know, because you've tuned in before, we always love to start with breaking in stories. Joe, tell us your breaking in story. Did you study film anywhere? And how did you get through the line?
I've got a bit of a long-winded one, but I'll do my best. My dad worked in advertising. He was like a copywriter, so he wrote ads back in well, he still vaguely does it now, but like in the 80s was kind of his heyday. And he was shooting an ad called The Dam Busters for Carling Black Label, which is a bit of like a cult ad. It's like a World War II beer advert. If that doesn't sound.
Does it have anything to do with the movie The Dam Busters?
It does, yeah. So basically, a bomber comes on and drops bouncing bombs that skim across the top of the water to hit the dam with the Nazi on, and he rolls his sleeves up and saves them like a goalkeeper. It was a very 80s TV ad. It's quite famous over here.
It's a great movie.
Yeah. So I was on the set for that at Pinewood. And they were shooting, I don't know if it was Batman or Batman Returns, but one of the Tim Burton Batmans. And I went to the back lot. They took us around the back lot, and we just wandered around Gotham City.
Wow.
And I was probably about 8 or 9, and it just totally blew my mind.
Oh, yeah.
It's just the coolest thing ever. So that was like me kind of turned on to the idea of kind of being in film. And then I went to college and stuff, and then I went to like a kind of vaguely a film school. We'll call it a film school because it sounds cooler. Where I met Jason back in 99, back in the olden days, when everyone was happy. And that was cool. So we spent 3 years working together and studying together. And then I came to London, was a runner. I was born in London, so I came back home with my folks, was a runner at RSA, Ridley Scott's production company, commercials company, for a couple of years, then had a kind of slightly acrimonious falling out with one of the directors there. And then...
okay, come on. You don't have to say who, but was it a good story of why you had a falling out?
Not really. He was just a real prick.
Okay.
And he found a modicum of success in film afterwards, which was really depressing. And he probably doesn't remember who I am, but I remember him, and he's a real dick.
You should invite him out to a certain mansion for a nice long stay.
Yeah, probably could.
Introduce him to Margaret and Thomas, his happy hosts.
Yeah, quite. He deserves it. And then I basically was like a kind of jobbing director for a while. I did like music videos, but like really like low budget. Like I never broke into like the kind of the big production company stuff. It was always like, I mean, somewhere between 300 quid and 20 grand kind of jobs, commercials, corporates, kind of bits and pieces, and kind of was a bit like, oh man, is this it, you know? And so I started doing shorts in my spare time, no money things, initially like narrative bits and pieces. And then I did some documentaries, little short documentaries, and they did quite well. I got like 3 or 4 in a row that were Vimeo staff picked. And then the interesting story is that about 6-7 years ago, I was having my first kid, or my wife was having our first kid, Vinny. And we went to a prenatal baby class, right? So, you know, you have like a class that teaches you how to have a baby. So I turned up at this weird one the council were running, which was like a freebie. And it's just full of really kind of slightly odd people lurking in the shadows. And it was all a bit strange. And there were these 2 other fairly middle-class people there. And we thought, oh, you're kind of like us. We'll chat to them. And I was chatting to this guy. And I was like, well, you know, what do you do for a living? And he's like, I'm a film producer. I'm like, that's funny. I'm a director. And I just DOP'd a job for Paul McCartney randomly with a director friend of mine, Simon Abood, who's kind of like a mentorish kind of character for me. So it sounded like I was far cooler and more successful than I was because I had Paul McCartney job under my belt. So we got on and we kind of like had lunch together, and then our kids were born at the same time, so we stayed in touch. And he was finishing a movie, he's just about to shoot a movie called Modern Life is Rubbish, which is like a kind of music rom-com thing. And then when he finished that, we did a short film together called Red Light, and that went really well. And then off the back of that, we decided to make a feature, and this is it. So it was kind of all due to having a kid and randomly meeting someone in a prenatal baby.
That's amazing, Jason. What's your breaking in story?
I don't think it's quite as interesting or as many kind of name drops as Joe's does, but
I know that you did a lot of TV production, right, early on.
Yeah. So I grew up in a small sort of rural town in Ireland, and so the notion of even working in film, let alone writing and directing or anything like that, was crazy, really. I mean, if I'd approached any of my teachers at the time, they would have laughed at me and told me to get out of the office, kind of thing. So I initially went to university and studied architecture, but the architecture department was right beside the film department. So every day I would go in, I'd be kind of like, way rather be doing what they're doing than what I'm doing. So after it wasn't even a year, I think I dropped out. Did like a foundation year in film and TV, then went to university, met Joe, then came out of university, moved to London. And it was really just a case of trying to get any sort of job within sort of film and TV. So I did all sorts of stuff. I worked in sort of long format TV, as you sort of mentioned, and like light entertainment, that kind of thing. I worked for a film distribution company. I worked for a trailer company, did some commercials, blah, blah, blah. So all sorts of stuff. And like these days I work as a commercials producer. But all the while I always wanted to be a writer, probably more so than anything else, with aspirations to direct as well. But so I would just continue writing and, share stuff with Joe and then another friend of ours, Owen, as well. And we the three of us would just constantly pass scripts back and forth. And, always try to make stuff. But it wasn't until Joe met our producer, Dom, in the new and data class that things actually sort of started moving in that direction. So, yeah.
That's great. I think it's awesome that you both come from these dispersed backgrounds and you've both done shorts, and you've produced TV and music videos as well. What was something that you guys have noticed, like on some of those early sets before we get to today's movie, that you're like, you know what, this is a mistake. When I get behind the camera or when I'm making a movie, I'm not going to make this mistake. What's like an important mistake that you kind of were annoyed sitting on the sidelines, biting your hands saying, let me in there, man, because I am not going to mess up like this?
Coverage, basically, is the worst thing in the world. Like, there's a real tendency over here, particularly to like shoot one of two ways. And it's either you stick the camera on your shoulder and walk into a room and just film whatever you fancy when you walk in there, which just ends up looking like a bad kind of kitchen sink drama. Or they shoot everything like a BBC drama, which is, mid-shot, wide shot, move on, and it's just boring. It's just not interesting. It doesn't do it for me.
I mean, we're going to talk about coverage later because you had amazing cinematography, and I really liked your shots in Kindred. So we're going to talk about that for sure. Jason, was there like a big mistake that you kind of got annoyed seeing on the sidelines?
I wouldn't say mistake so much as I always noticed that I was always struck by how far confidence would take a lot of people. Do you know what I mean? Particularly directors. I could tell they weren't actually that good, but if they come in with like full-on confidence, people just seem to sort of buy it. And that always really struck me as odd as much as anything else, but also sort of made you think, well, you know what? If they can do it, I can probably do it too.
Yeah, I like the fake it till you make it lifestyle, but at a certain point, you got to have the skills. So,
and also that's one thing I would say, not to big you up too much, Jeff, but one of the really useful things about being a listener to your podcast over the years is the fact that you learn that there's no one way into the industry, and there's not one personality type that is a writer. And Jason and I, through listening to your podcast, have had a connection with hundreds of writers that we'll never meet in real life, and you hear all these different insights into how people break into the industry and their different approaches. And what you learn quite early on, is when you first start out, you find yourself kind of mimicking other people and trying to work out how they did it. And that's a really important step in learning how you want to do it yourself, And I think that it's podcasts like this that over the years I think have been really useful to Jason and I and our friend Owen, who I have to shout out, who's kind of the third member of our trio, whose birthday it was yesterday. So happy birthday!
Happy birthday!
I think that having that insight into the way things are done by different people all over the world is a really useful thing, and it's helped us a lot.
Mom, you're embarrassing me. You know what? Though? Thanks for saying that. That's very kind of you. And you're right, though. I think the one message that I want anybody to know that's tuning in or watching this on YouTube, now that we've been putting these on YouTube at the Backstory Magazine YouTube page during the pandemic, is that there is no one way to do it. And obviously, I'm not the originator of that. It's really William Goldman, who the famous screenwriter who said nobody knows anything. And he's right in that way. The only thing you have to know is your story. And that if you're dedicated to telling a good story and you're doing your due diligence, I think that's going to be the best route for every writer, and they're going to get there by a million different paths. So that's why when I'm going to ask you guys in a couple of minutes, like your habits for writing, it's a coin flip, whether or not you outline or whether or not you just dive in there. And there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's technically whatever works. But before we get there, for Kindred, I'd read a bit about how it was originally a short film idea, Cor Vitae, which is the class.
So it wasn't really a short film idea. What it was I basically, as most writers do, have a folder on my computer somewhere with just like kind of little ideas and little single sentences, and kind of, it's anything from a single sentence to a page of random text, and I kind of keep a folder, probably got 35 documents in it of various bits and pieces that are any good, And then when I finished this short film I did called Red Light with Jessie Buckley, who's getting quite big now, she's super cool, was in it, so that kind of helped make the film more successful. I sat down with Dom, the producer, and I was like, I need to write a feature now. I had probably written 8 features, 10 features, quite a lot at that point, and I think I had 2 that were any good, but they weren't first-time features. They were big and violent and kind of not right for a first-timer. So I went back into the ideas folder with Dom, went through my various ideas, and in the 10 years or so it had been since I first wrote down this concept of a family kidnap their daughter-in-law when she's pregnant because they don't want her to run away with the baby. I just had that as a line. And in those 10 years, I'd become a father and had another baby on the way, and it just totally, what hadn't previously really made sense to me as an idea, I couldn't find a way in. It felt really kind of a bit cliched and a bit violent and not quite right. Suddenly I had like a kind of epiphany about the right way to do it, because my life had changed. The idea had stayed the same in a weird way, but like I'd changed, and so it became a different thing. And so I started writing up some kind of outlines and immediately hit some brick walls and was like, oh, Jesus, this is really hard. So Jason got a like emergency phone call, and I was like, we'd been looking for something for a while to collaborate on together. So it seemed like a good opportunity. So he came and saved the day basically quite early on. And
that's cool.
Wow. Stuff out.
And so so let's get into it. But so Cor Vitae, it was never a short.
Cor Vitae, it was, which is like COVID. As you know, it's birds, like bird flu, COVID. So Cor Vitae is the name of the crow family of birds. Right. So initially it was called Kin, but then that sci-fi movie came out called Kin. Then it was called Kindred, and then there's a thing you get in Europe called a Kinder egg. And we kept thinking, I kept thinking Kinder egg. I thought I was going to do my head in if we call it that. So we called it Cor Vitae, and then it was called that all the way through production. And then we finished the cut, and we were like, no one knows what Cor Vitae means.
No one can pronounce it.
No one can pronounce it. So we went back to Kindred, and so that's where we are.
That makes sense. Well, let's talk about your habit for a second. First off, just as co-writers, when you guys sit down to write, do you write together, and maybe you broke the story together, and then you would go off separately, or did you write the whole story together? We're
big back and forthers, really. I'm a big believer in back and forthing, because it gives the person who's not writing a bit of a break to think about things. So I think what initially happened is I came up with a bunch of ideas, had a vague plot outline, and then said to Jason, this is really bad. What can you do with this? And Jason came in and was full of ideas and kind of helped nail that down into a decent order and sent it to me, and then I kind of work on it for a bit and send it back. And we tend to work to like a kind of, as you can see from the board behind me, podcast listeners can't, but we tend to work to a kind of 40-ish scene kind of like outline, and we'll basically have a Word document which is 40 scenes long, and we'll write it out, and that'll end up being anywhere. I mean, that was probably about 40 or 50 pages, wasn't it, Jace?
Yeah, easy. Well, maybe not quite as much as 50, but yeah, it was certainly up there.
It was pretty jam-packed. And then, for better or worse, Jason's wife went into hospital having their twins prematurely. And you should probably take over there, Jason.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it, I think we did on email, Joe. You correct me if I'm wrong. We just went back and forth for ages. And then we met up a few times to hammer some things out. And then we'd meet up with Dom to sort of get his opinions. And then eventually it sort of became crunch time of, okay, we're going to have to do a draft. And coincidentally, around the same time, my wife was pregnant. And I very naively thought, well, I'll get some time off for paternity leave. I can just write a draft then, which was madness, really. But it kind of worked out because the kids were premature. I ended up having to go and stay in the hospital for 2 weeks straight. Couldn't really leave. And of course, they slept all the time. So I just took my laptop and started writing. So that was bizarre because given the themes of Kindred, I was sort of imprisoned in this hospital. But what makes it even weirder is this hospital overlooks quite a famous prison in London called Wormwood Scrubs. And So I would look out the window and I was looking down into this prison and into the yard. So all of that kind of stuff was kind of racing through my head. But yeah, so whenever the kids were asleep, I had nothing else to do. I would just write. And I think by the time we get out of the hospital, I think I had a draft of some sort, Joe.
Yeah,
which
I think you had a draft. I think you had the first stab was in like less than 2 weeks. Even it was super
something
quick.
Like that, maybe. Yeah.
The outline was so detailed. It's that I don't really like that process of transferring the outline to script. I find it just really laborious and kind of painful. But Jason's super quick at doing it, so it's quite.
That's actually my favorite part. Actually, I find the outlining the really painful stuff, and then once you get an outline, I'll happily write all day.
Well, let's go back for 1 second, just because for podcast listeners, if you're not looking on the YouTube page where we have a video recording of the Zoom, behind Joe is a corkboard, and he's got a whole bunch of note cards on there. So, are you a big note carder? And where did you come up with the idea that you wanted to hit 40 scenes? It's just an interesting number. There's no one way to do it. I'm just curious how you arrived there.
I basically have, in moments of crisis over the years, read just about every screenwriting book imaginable. I did the McKee story thing twice, and just from a kind of amalgamation of all these different opinions and ways of doing it, I kind of formed my own theory in a weird kind of way. And I think that initially came from the kind of the Save the Cat style 40-scener. And then you basically adapt it to what you think works, And I think the most useful thing about all of those screenwriting books is, that screenwriting is a craft really rather than a kind of an art form, And if you can understand the craft and find your own approach to it, you just try and make it work that way, if you know what I mean. So that's the skeleton, as it were. And once you start putting meat on the bones, it goes up or down and does its own thing. And I find that when you do start transferring the outline into a script, it sounds a bit hippy-dippy, but like the script a lot of the time kind of takes on a life of its own, and it kind of tells you what it wants to do. And you'll find yourself totally changing an act or totally changing a bunch of scenes because when you're writing the script, what you had planned doesn't feel quite right, But that's part of the fun of writing, I think, That's the kind of thing.
It's interesting because behind you, there's 3 acts and there's 10 boards. I just counted.
No. You can't see there's a plant in the way. So there's 4. It's like Act 1, Act 2, Part 1, Act 2, Part 2, and then Act 3. So I split Act 2 into two columns.
Okay, wait. I'm just curious. Is that something you do a lot? Did you do that on Kindred? Why are you splitting Act 2?
That's just so I know where the midpoint climax is. Basically, the end of the end of Act 2, Part 1.
Okay. And then, when we get into the spoilers, I'm gonna love hearing where your different points are for Kindred as well. So how long did you guys spend on this outline for Kindred?
I actually know the answer because well, sort of know the answer. Joe, I think you emailed me in January because I just started a new job, and that's how I remember when it was. So that's when the idea was sort of proposed that we would do something, and obviously I started writing the first draft. It must have been at the very start of March. So I wouldn't say it was necessarily 3 months, but it certainly wasn't any longer than that.
Okay. And then, obviously you guys are sending it back and forth. So when you start scripting, 2 questions on this. First one is the one I always ask writing teams. How do you control which draft is the OG, the master draft, as you're sending things back and forth so many times? Just get that one out of the way really quick if you can.
I think I could be wrong. I think we just duplicate it, right? And then label it Joe or Jason, and then the number goes up. So it's like, as soon as you send it over, it's your job, when it's your turn, you duplicate the script, change the name. So it goes from like Kindred _ Jason 03, and it becomes Kindred Joe 04.
Okay.
And then when I send it back to him, it becomes Kindred Jason 05, and then you can kind of see the number go up. I think that's what we did anyway.
I think so as well.
You're doing a save as every time, and you're giving it like a new name, so that makes sense.
So you end up with a kind of a horrible mess folder full of weird junk and old files and stuff. But anything you can.
All right, let's talk about your daily habit. When you sit down to write, how many hours do you write a day, or do you give yourself a page count number?
So the kind of the horrible dirty secret Jason and I have is that like we're not really full timers at this. This is still technically a hobby for us. Like even though I directed the movie, co-wrote the movie, I still have a kind of day job because it's my first film. So when I'm like a freelance, so I do weird bits of filming or editing or whatever it is. So when I'm not working, and it depends what the kids are doing, but I'll happily sit and do 6 hours writing. Fine. I don't do a page count because some days I'll do 5 pages, but I mean the other day I did like almost 20 because I'd outlined it quite strictly and I kind of knew what I was doing and it was fine. And Jason's got a proper job like an actual grown-up.
Yeah, no, I know. So I have a full-time job, which wasn't as big a problem until I had the kids. So, but even then, I was thinking about this today, but whenever I didn't have the kids, I would kind of I would only write really when I either forced myself to or when the inspiration struck. So it wasn't all that much really, to be honest. And I probably write more now because I know that I'll get a window in between my day job and in between the kids and everything else. So I'm probably more productive now, and it's really I'll write for as long as I can, as I'm allowed to, put it that way. Say again?
What's your day job?
So I'm a commercials producer. So it's pretty full on, Yeah. So whenever I can, really. I always sit down with the notion of I'd like to do 10 pages. That rarely happens because I just simply don't get enough time. But if I can get 5, that's pretty good.
What do you guys do if you get writer's block? If you get it, how do you handle that?
I tend to be writing more than one project at the same time, which helps. So I've always got a couple of things I'm working on. Because that's the joy of freelance, is that, if I'm not working, I feel so guilty about not working, is that writing gives me something to do. Kind of ridiculous in a way. So I've got quite a lot of scripts because when I'm not working, like, I'll sit and write, because otherwise I just end up watching daytime TV or doing something terrible like that. So I think that writer's block is something I tend to just write my way through, or just watch loads of research. If I'm doing a sci-fi, I'll give myself the excuse to watch loads of sci-fi movies. If I'm doing a horror movie, I'll watch loads of horror films. That helps.
That makes sense. And Jason?
Well, I find that I get blocked more whenever I'm trying to come up with the initial idea or trying to beat it out. That tends to be whenever I get blocked. And if I do, at that stage, I'll just sort of, I think just go for a walk or just do anything else. But recently I've found, particularly if I'm in the script phase, if I just force myself to sit down and just start writing something, move my fingers over the keys, that tends to do the trick because eventually it'll just sort of click in. But I tend not to get blocked as much when I'm doing that kind of stuff.
That was the Jeff podcast classic answers always go for a walk. It's like, dude, I don't walk anyway, you crazy. I take the kids to school in the car and I come home and I sit in my chair.
That's awesome. So then my next question would be, how long until your first draft? How long until you guys got a first draft?
I mean, yeah, I think outline, by the sounds of it, outline was what, about 2.5, 3 months, and then first draft was like soon. So probably from first conversations between Jason and I to first draft in hand was about 4 months or something.
Okay.
And then getting that first draft good, that was probably another couple of months, 4 months.
Yeah, certainly. We went back and forth on that a lot.
What were I mean, you'll tell us in the spoiler section what the things were that you ironed out. Well, so here you are, like a lot of writers, you have the experience in the industry and other jobs. You really are ready to make a feature debut, but it's difficult. There's a lot of absolutely fantastic scripts out there that are never made. And tell us about your path to getting this as a feature film debut and the kind of hoops you had to jump through, and also as a way to make sure you got to stay on to direct it, Joe, because I know that sometimes, people find a script that they like and they just basically say, okay, we'll buy this script, but you can't direct it. So how did you get to stay on and talk about making the dreams come true?
Yeah, I think what basically happened was, because the producer and I, Dom and I, had a friendship. We had kids the same age. We'd met at that prenatal baby class, and kind of we had that going for us. It meant that he was kind of always on our side when it came to those kind of arguments with finances and stuff. Equally, I'd just done this short film with him that was by no means some massive festival smash, because I think it was a bit too dark for people's tastes. But it was enough of an evidence of my talent that it made people a bit excited to see what I do with the feature, and also it was a really good lesson for me on casting, because we got super lucky with the cast. We cast Jessie Buckley in the short just before she kind of blew up. She had the film Beast come out just afterwards, and then a whole bunch of other stuff. She's been in Judy, and she's in that Charlie Kaufman film, the name of which
I'm thinking of Ending Things.
I'm thinking about Ending Things, and she's kind of going from kind of strength to strength. And so we then were chatting about, you have to put a kind of a tent pole in the ground as far as cast goes to try and get the money involved. Like, we got the script, we sent it to a casting agent, Alice, who is massively talented and got a great eye for stuff. And we had a chat with her, and it was like, right, okay, we need to get the one person in who we can then get everyone else excited about, and then draw other cast in to help us get the money, and then it snowballs from there. So Dom had a relationship with Jack Loudon because he'd cast him in his previous film, the Modern Life is Rubbish, this rom-com thing, and then Jack had to pull out because he got the chance to play Morrissey in the Morrissey movie, England Is Mine. But they kept a friendship going. So when this script came up, Jack was really into it, and we boarded him as a producer. So he was he wasn't a co-producer. He was a producer with Dom on the film. They produced it together because he wants to get into that side of things. So then all of a sudden, there's a massive string to our bow. That not only is Jack in the film, and he's a superb actor, but he's given us his kind of clout and approval to be involved as a producer. So once he was involved, that made it easier for us to find Margaret, who we were very lucky to get Fiona Shaw. And then once we had those two involved, it was like, right, okay, Charlotte, now we've got those two. We don't have to get someone established to be Charlotte. We don't have to go to like a kind of quote-unquote famous actress. We can go to someone younger or fresher or do what we want. And Jack had just done a TV series. He just shot it, a TV series called The Long Song, which is about the end of plantation slavery in Jamaica in I don't know what year it was exactly, 18 something, 17 something. But Tamara was the lead in that, and they'd struck up a friendship over there, and he was like, "You need to see Tamara." So we did we cast. Another weird job I did back in the day was I was a cameraman on casting like sessions for like really bad commercials and all kinds of weird things. It was an awful job. I hated it. All right.
You've intrigued me. Tell me the worst casting moment that you experienced behind the camera. You don't have to use names, but it was when. But
that's the thing. It was never anyone famous. It was always random model gets called in for an acting gig. Was usually the one where there's someone who has no knowledge of the craft of acting and no ability to act. who was then asked to act. And it's just, you're sitting there with your, like, just like, oh man, just when will this be over? And then like, you're like, okay, well, it must be almost over. You know, so they finish and they leave and you open the door and there's like 30 people waiting outside and your heart just sinks. You're just like, oh, geez Louise. So because of that, I've always cast from a really small number of people. So I'll watch what people have done. I'll, sometimes have a chat with them beforehand if I can, and I'll then bring them into the casting, and I'll see 4 people, 5 people, and spend an hour and a half with each of them, rather than see 30 people and spend 20 minutes with each of them, Yeah. Because, if I'm actually going to cast this person, I'm not going to judge it off a small amount, and I'm not just going to go and see some random person whose work I don't like, So, Tamara, we brought into that environment. So she came in for her hour or hour and a half, whatever it was. And just within the first scene she wrote, that we'd written out for her, this monologue, she just totally smashed it. I was like, okay, fine, great, done, So,
I mean, the casting was amazing. I guess for our podcast listeners, it's an interesting thing to talk about because there's so much speculative work that could be done. When you contracted with Alice as your casting director, did you pay her anything, or was it kind of like on deferment?
It's like I think it's a weird middle ground where I think Dom had to chip in a bit of money. The thing with Alice is that she was making the break from being an assistant to being her own lady, as it were. So she worked for Fiona Weir, who's like a big casting agent over here, who is like, does the Harry Potter films and stuff. You know? So she was Fiona Weir's, initially her assistant, and then worked her way up to be her, there's a word for it, I can't remember, which is like her kind of like co-colleague, kind of like not quite equal, but kind of equal, if that makes sense. And she was looking to set herself up as her own thing with Fiona's blessing. They're still very good friends. So she and her agent were a bit more easygoing about all that kind of thing. But to anyone
really
listening, cool. a decent casting director is worth their weight in gold.
Oh yeah, I mean,
the contacts that they have with the agents is second to none. They will get you in the room with people who are way beyond your means.
I mean, you have a great cast, and like this is like a great piece for any of your 3 leads to sink their teeth into. But I mean, even Dr. Richards?
Yeah.
And Jane, her friend, the 2 side characters, they had great stuff to do as well. So I mean, like, it was you wrote a very meaty script that would attract actors, which I think is a good way to go. What was your budget and schedule? Like, once you got your cast done, what was your budget and schedule?
The budget, I know that everyone's always really elusive about that, but genuinely, I don't really know. It was less than 2 million.
Okay. Okay.
I know that much. It was probably like 1.9. I don't know.
Pounds, I'm guessing, is what you're talking about?
Yeah, I guess. Okay. I don't get those emails.
That's all good.
I've been cut out of those emails. And our shoot was supposed to be, I think, 24 days, and it ended up being like 22 and a half or something.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, yeah. You got a lot in there for that. Well, so look, podcast listeners, we are going to get into the spoilers now. So by the time you're hearing this, you could see Kindred anywhere that you are used to seeing or renting movies. So go out, see Kindred, support independent filmmakers like our guests today, and then come on back, and we're going to get into the spoilers of it. So you have been warned. All right. Well, so I'll start easy. This is, a big old white town. And I thought it was really smart for inclusion casting to have Charlotte cast as a woman of color. Was that an original part of your design, or was it something that you just realized, as you said, once you had your lead actors cast, that this would be a good opportunity to go outside the box?
Well, I think Jason and I had a discussion very early on about what kind of person we thought Charlotte would be. And we were really open about the idea that we weren't going to be specific in the script about the type of person. For a long time, I think we discussed maybe it being an Eastern European character, because in the UK, because the film for us is more about the class system than it is about race, because of the issues that we have in the UK in general, I think, in that world. That made sense to us, but we weren't precious one way or another. We just tried to keep an open mind. And then when Tamara came in, and she was just the best person we saw, we cast her. And then, I mean, the reality of it is that, we didn't cast her for any kind of woke reason, or because it was kind of like a kind of a right on kind of honorable thing to do. She's just kind of the best person for the gig.
Okay. Did you need to do any retconning? Did you need to do any rewrites?
No, that's the fact. The only thing we did is actually, now I mention it, it sounds a bit dark side, but in the script originally, Charlotte, when she gets locked in the kind of last act into the room, she initially was caged. It was like chained to the bed. And the only thing we did when we cast Tamara was get rid of that because it had too many racial undertones, basically.
Yeah. Because because it's interesting. It is more about class, and I mean, you definitely get the outsider feel. The only other women of color that we see are at the hospital. Working at the hospital as doctors and nurses and other people. But it was interesting because it wasn't exactly about race, but there was an undertone of separation, of isolationism, because she had no one that she really could confide in that was of a similar background. So it increased the isolation aspect. And, I thought it really worked like that. I'm curious about, the crux of the movie. Okay. This is the big spoiler, kids. And this is going to inform our conversations as we go down the line, talking about our other characters. Is you're essentially doing a fun treatise on Rosemary's Baby in a way, just to use a classic, post that we all know, versus a psychological thriller where the protagonist is having issues with their version of reality. And in such that, is she given tea that has a drug in it is kind of debated for a while. And then of course at the end, Thomas does admit that something was in there. We never get a full explanation of what. So her paranoia kind of paid off a little. But, at first I was wondering if, how far in on it is Dr. Richards, and does Margaret have any actual powers? And that's what was creating her dizzy spells and some of her visions. And I think you did a good job of kind of walking a tightrope throughout most of the movie to use that as a mechanism for tension and suspense, in which you were trying to keep the audience guessing, kind of the way that she herself would be guessing. Talk about kind of enabling that as part of your momentum to drive your story forward, because it's in the background, and it seems to me that like you do make a decision that's pretty strong, which we'll talk about in a second when we get into the exact ending. But what was it like for you to keep that balance going back and forth between, is there a vast conspiracy from this crazy family, or is she like her mother having prenatal problems that will result in a dangerous postpartum depression?
I think for me, a big part of it was the perspective of the film. That's what it came down to, was the idea that we wanted to set the film up that when you first start watching it, you think, oh, it's a film about this loving couple, And then as the film plays out and develops, you realize that it's not actually about the couple. It's about this lady who's in the couple, Charlotte, the girlfriend. And then after the tragedy occurs, you are then thrust into her point of view for the rest of the film. From that point on, you're very much seeing things through her eyes. And with that, I think that you want to keep the audience guessing, because she as a character is guessing. She doesn't know what's going on, You don't want the audience to be aware of anything that she as a protagonist isn't aware of herself, So I think that was the kind of the constant battle, was trying to find that balance between suspense, the kind of the keeping the narrative going, and yet not revealing too much at any one time, really.
Jason?
Well, I think what's interesting as well is we, in the earlier stages as well, we went back and forth a lot about, what she was actually going through, and kind of explored all the different avenues, before finally sort of, deciding on a kind of a through line. So I think that's probably as well why it kind of comes off as it does, because we did go down so many avenues and kind of, looked at it in a number of different ways.
Also, I think we always thought it was really important that we never kind of answered too many questions. I think keeping it ambiguous to a certain extent was always quite important to us. And initially, the first ending we ever wrote was completely ambiguous when she basically...
Hold on. I'm going to get to left turns in a second. Let's just explain for the podcast listeners, God forbid there's anyone that hasn't actually seen the movie and they're on the fence. what the ending is that after being controlled by the family who definitely want her baby, after being locked up throughout the movie, she ends up kind of in a lockdown in a mental hospital, in a mental ward of a regular hospital after she's delivered the baby. And you could see it very well as in which the antagonists have achieved their goal for the moment, at least, of taking away the baby and having the baby for their own, the mother Margaret and Thomas, the stepson. And that's kind of the ending that you leave us with. And before that, just to go back for 1 second on this, and I do want to hear about your other version, but to go back on this bit about reality versus dream, there is a moment when she's finally driving, the second time she escapes in the car, where the black crows that have been haunting her and haunting her dreams for the entire movie are catching up. I mean, you're going Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds full force, and they're coming at their car. They splatter on the windshield. And then you do a very interesting thing in which you cut away from the car and you show that there are no birds on the road whatsoever. And this is supposed to be an omniscient point of view. So we're taking it as filmic reality here. And you're showing us that one way or another, in her mind, these birds exist, which again is kind of still smart, because it doesn't necessarily mean one way or another that she is just having a psychotic breakdown versus some sort of other kind of magic, hyper-realism curse that's going on with her as well. So tell us about that point of demarcation, because it was, definitely pulling back your curtains in some direction. And then I definitely want to hear about the other ending.
The funny thing is, even now, I'll have conversations with producer Dom, and he's convinced that she's crazy. And I'll have a conversation with Jack, and he's like, "No, we were drugging her the whole time." It's I think Jason and I have always kind of played our cards slightly close to our chest and kept it ambiguous on purpose. I think for me, it is essentially...
But that scene is a very distinct decision.
Yeah, it is, yeah. For me, it's always been a film about manipulation and trust, and the fact that the family are untrustworthy and manipulating her, and they are, quote-unquote, the bad guys from the first moment you see them. And there isn't necessarily anything wrong with her at all, other than the fact that she's under their influence and being drugged and all that stuff. But having said that, I think the important thing about art, not that I want to call our film art because it sounds really pretentious, but I think the important thing about film and paintings and whatever it might be is that the audience can take their own experience to it and then walk away and have their own kind of opinion on it. That's why we didn't want to kind of scream and shout what we thought was happening. Because I think it's important to sometimes create, maybe it's a cop-out, but it's important to create conversation starters and topics with film sometimes. And I think the problem with ambiguity is, you get a film, I shouldn't be mean about other people's films, maybe I shouldn't be specific, but you get a lot of films, particularly low-budget American independent films, that just end. You'll be halfway through a scene and all of a sudden it cuts to black and the titles come up and you're like, well, where's the ending? Do you know what I mean? I'm missing out on the whole thing here. As an audience, I'm not satisfied by that. And they play the ambiguity card and it feels like a cop-out, Whereas what we wanted to do was to take that ambiguity but give you a proper ending with it. So you can come away from it satisfied, but still different people will see it together and potentially have different theories about the way things ended up the way they are.
Jason?
I was just wondering if that had actually answered your question, Jeff.
I mean, it does. I just wanted to know if you wanted to have anything to add. I didn't want you to feel sidelined, because it is a big moment when you're showing birds that only she's seeing.
Yeah, well, my memory of it is that it was. I think it was. You correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, but I think it was always that way. That was from very, very early on, that you did cut to the outside and there was nothing there. So okay. I think cool. in many ways it may have been cemented in the beginning, and we probably just didn't want to let that go, even though we decided to play with ambiguity.
Well, let's hear about that other ending, because it's always fun to hear left turns. You know that I love left turns. I live for it. So yeah, other ideas that never made it to even production. I'm curious about what your other ending was and stuff like that.
What happened was after the car crashes, we cut to her in Australia on the beach with the kid playing. And you think that she's in Australia and everything's worked out for her. And then suddenly you cut back and she's actually by the side of the road with her feet in the kind of like muddy puddle, kind of like in the remnants of this car crash, and then you cut out from there.
Kind of the Brazil ending.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. But also just like that was too far up the ambiguity street, you know. I think it wasn't satisfying enough as an ending. You know, we never shot that. You know, we knew way in advance of the shoot that we changed it. But yeah, that was something we did toy with.
Okay, we know. I think
Jason,
Antagonists. Say that again.
Any other things we changed? Can you remember?
Well, the one thing I remember is there was, for a long time, Margaret died. Do you remember?
No.
But I think yes, Thomas pushed her down the stairs.
That's right. Yeah.
But then I think we just felt that it was kind of unnecessary and a bit too harsh.
And also we had not to go into deleted scenes, but there was that other scene, the other staircase scene, so it felt too similar to that. But then we cut that anyway. So that's fine.
That's right.
So that's a deleted scene. Something happens on the staircase.
Yeah, there were only a couple of scenes that didn't make it, and one of them was when Charlotte comes back to the house quite early in staying in the home, and she collapses and she wakes up in bed and kind of has a fever dream about the birds, and then sees the doctor potentially speaking to Margaret at the end of the bed. There was a scene we shot in there where she cuts her hand and then she stumbles out looking for help, and she starts walking down the stairs. And she starts losing consciousness and she collapses, but she collapses kind of into Thomas's arms. And funny enough, in the script, it reads really well and it seems really exciting. And even when we shot it, it seemed to work pretty well. But in the edit, you realize that the lower she goes on the steps, the less chance there is of her hurting herself, you know, to the point where she's pretty much standing.
That's funny. That's funny.
At the bottom, when you're like, oh, wait, that's not dramatic at all. You know, it's like, it's one of those things you can jazz it up when you're writing it, but in reality, it just didn't give us enough, you know, to warrant the extra 2 minutes of screen time.
Well, it's always good to talk about antagonists, and here you have some really interesting characters in Margaret and Thomas. And I just want to say Jack's performance was absolutely amazing. So was Fiona's as well. But I mean, Jack especially. There was a child like a stunted child trapped inside an adult's body sent to his character. And I just thought his monologue about killing his dad and just always trying to be an ally to her because he considers her to be an abused, you know, child, like the way that he considers himself to be, and he was. It's just fascinating. I mean, especially when after he talks about the murder of his dad, he's like, but it wasn't murder. It's just like, oh, really? Wasn't it? But you know, you have this great monologue for Margaret. And she's a complicated, controlling mother. You do one of your one-take shots where you're kind of creeping in on her slowly, and she's just talking about feeling nothing. And basically, until her child got hurt, and maybe she encountered the concept of losing the child, that was the time when her mother sensibilities clicked in. Controlling mothers are definitely a staple of the horror genre. What were some of the things that were going on when you were creating Margaret? Because you have a character with a very specific goal of control the family and obviously get her grandchild at you know, and spend the world to get it, no matter what it takes in damage.
Jason, do you want to take it?
Well, she was quite interesting actually, because I think when we initially wrote her, she was really quite harsh. She didn't really have any redeeming features.
This is the light version of her. That's hilarious.
It really is. No, because it was just there was almost no humanity to her whatsoever. So, you know, she just didn't have as much depth. So we had to go back and just go, you know, we've got to make this a more rounded person. So that was my big memory of it more than anything else. Although I didn't necessarily mind the super evil version of her, but I think it was a good choice to round her out a little bit.
I mean, yeah, you know, early on when I was trying to decide if there was something supernatural and she has this cane and she's like hobbling, I'm like, oh, like her power had affected her physically. But then you kind of like, you know, once I realized it wasn't going that way, you have this humane moment where it's explained that, you know, her hip was shattered from spousal abuse by, you know, her drunken second husband. So it was a good way to just remind us that she is a real person. And I thought it was a good way to make a 3-dimensional character out of her, which I thought was really important.
I think that the thing about pretty much all the characters in the film is that you can make an argument for each of them that their opinion is justified. You know, even Margaret, who's a bit of a monster, really, she's completely convinced that she's doing the right thing. equally Thomas is, equally Charlotte is. You know, everyone is acting kind of in their own self-interests, but is also convinced that they're doing the right thing. I think that's a really interesting dynamic, and it creates quite an interesting amount of conflict between them because no one wants to back down on anything because they think that they're right, you know?
Well, I mean, Charlotte says that she was thinking about not having the kid because her mom, you know, had so many mental problems. And I'm curious how you arrived at the idea, because I thought the conspiracy was kicking in full force, and I'm sure it wasn't in a way, when she calls Julie for help when she's escaped. And Julie comes and picks her up and drives her right back to the house, which is a strange thing for her friend to do unless she was in on the conspiracy. But I would assume that off camera, the only explanation for it in a non-conspiracy situation is that Julie has been convinced that Charlotte is having an episode of some sort. And so we never see that happen, which keeps us guessing, which is also interesting.
If you, the eagle-eyed viewer, will notice that the scene previous with that character in, they are together in the sitting room chatting, and then Charlotte goes to the toilet and comes back and she's disappeared. Yeah. And she's like, where's she gone? And he's like, oh yeah, she had to go. And the idea is that they'd have had an exchange at that point where he said to her, she's not well, you don't know what she's going through, you know, and does enough to convince her that when push comes to shove and everything goes to shit, she is worried enough about her friend that she would take her back to the place that she thinks is the best place for her. So she is, in a horrible way, acting out of a place of love in taking her back to that home.
Yeah. And I mean, it works to kind of keep us guessing on, is she having a paranoid delusional episode, or is there something else going on? And, you know, it seems like Julie's just outside of that scope, which is interesting. You know, you were talking about coverage earlier, and I was really clocking your coverage during the movie. You do a lot of beautiful, you know, well choreographed mezzanine scene type of master shots, usually without additional coverage. Like you're often not cutting into it, which is interesting, and I think a great way to go. Did that mess you up at all in the editing room? Because I could see that if you're doing mise-en-scène, your scenes are technically playing out in the frame and you're getting what you need. And I was noticing that you were able to do interstitials between the major scenes of dream moments, birds fluttering, and other mood elements. But I'm just curious if that ever messed you up, because I know it's a style that can be dangerous because you get coverage that is hard to get out of. You are locked in, which, by the way, I think is great because you made great choices, but you are locked in.
Yeah, I think the part of that is the luck of having great cast. You know, that makes a big difference. If we were working with a bunch of people we knew from down the pub or whatever, it would be a different kind of fish. But the fact is, you're dealing with people who are so good, you can trust them to get the scene right, you know. There are obviously certain scenes where you get a kind of like a plan B shot just in case you need it. Sometimes you don't have time. And the funny thing about a lot of those extra shots, you know, the shots of the taxidermy and the paintings and the establishers and those things, is that a few of them, our friend Owen, who I've mentioned a few times, came and shot a couple of days with us right at the end to pick up the stuff we hadn't got yet. But most of it I shot myself, evenings or mornings, or even during lunchtime. I'd take the spare camera and the lenses without a runner, without a camera system, without anything, and just walk around the house shooting whatever we had to film. Because the weird thing about the way I've come up through the industry is that I used to work as a DOP for a bit. So I know that side of things, and I'm technically able to shoot stuff. So, you know, all those dead bugs on windowsills and things, that's just me.
Those were great.
Around the house picking things up, you know.
And those help you with your transitions, you know, because with the right score, you could let a scene linger in the audience's mind that way.
And also, that was always part of the plan. The score was kind of planned from quite early on, that we knew that would be kind of a character in the film of itself, you know.
Yeah, I mean, well, the house was great. So I mean, like having a great location that you could use for horror. Was it really like that? Like that?
Yeah,
was it dilapidated? Like, tell us how it smelled.
To the point where the guy who lives in the house is actually called Thomas, the same as the character in the film, completely randomly. So basically what happened was we, for various weird production reasons I don't really understand, we had to shoot in Ireland, although the film's technically set in Scotland. So we went over there, and you look around Dublin for locations, and we found a couple of places that were okay, but weren't quite right. And you kind of hear these whispers about this place called Stradbally. And everyone's like, oh, don't shoot in Stradbally, because it's the Irish film crew are quite unionised. And if you shoot outside of Dublin a certain distance, you have to overnight all the crew. It's hard to get the kit out there without massive delivery fees and all this stuff. It becomes a bit of a problem. And producer Dom and I were driving out there, and he's like, oh, God, I hope this place isn't good. And then the second you get to the gates, I was just like, sorry, dude, this is it. So, and fair play to him, he was on board as well. And it is what it is, like it's a dilapidated. The issue with Ireland, Jason knows better than I do, is that because of the kind of English occupation, as it were, when they kicked the English out, a lot of these manor houses were burnt down. And in England, this kind of house would have a cafe in it and a car park, and people would pay $5 to wander around it and look at paintings. Whereas in Ireland, they're still a bit, unsure about where these things fit into their legacy. So a lot of them are just slightly falling apart. And the funny thing is, at this house, they run Ireland's biggest hipster music festival on that ground. It's called Electric Picnic. And it's like, I don't know, 30 or 40 or 50,000 people go there. Wow. And kind of like get drunk and watch quite big bands playing, So, yeah, it's just this massive weird house.
Well, I mean, it made sense for you to be able to do that. My favorite interstitial you had, thematically, you had a bird trapped in glass that was a dead bird trapped in glass, and that was good. But you had these dead rabbits that were boxing, and like, what the hell was that? Like, was that even something that you scripted or just something that you found? Because I love the taxidermy dead boxing rabbits.
Yeah, it's a weird mix of stuff that Derek, the production designer, found and brought in, and some stuff that was in the house already. So that boxing rabbit was already in there. There's an amazing one, which is in the opening title sequence, which you can't quite make out in the film, which is a court case scene with two, what are they? Is it cockerels overseeing? There's like a rabbit that has killed a chicken's baby, and it's being held back by some ferrets. And it's this weird, like, set piece involving these really weird, quite rare, potentially on the extinction list, kind of like taxidermy animals. But
I just want you to know I'm here for the taxidermy stage sequences, so that could be a short documentary. I'm curious, like, again, on coverage, I would think that some of your things were very well boarded, especially some of your dream sequences, because the way that she was uncovering herself, recovering herself, rolling over, stepping, she's literally stepping from one memory into another, from memory to reality. So how extensive was your boarding for stuff like that?
I boarded everything, because that's
the whole movie.
Whole movie on my own, sat in a coffee shop. Literally,
are you a good artist, or are you good?
Terrible, absolutely.
Okay.
Jason's seen them. They're basically like, it's somewhere between a stick man and a ransom note. Okay. You can imagine that. But it's enough. It makes sense to me, and it means that. And I had to do it before we had locations, before we had anything. Just kind of what was in my mind. And then what I did a lot of the time is I then went around the location. I should talk to you about rehearsal actually as well. But during just before the shoot, I went around the location with the DOP, with Carlos, with my storyboards and the room, and was like, okay, this is what I had in mind for how we'd shoot this. And he'd have his stills camera, and we'd kind of take a photo of every angle we thought would work, just so that we had so little time with the actual shoot. When we walked into a room, we'd be like, okay, we know what our shots are in this room. It is, this crazy wide and a 25 mil, and then a really tight 70 of her face, and then that's all we need, and you'd know what you were doing as you went around the house. This isn't really to do with your question you just asked, but I think is an important point. That's
absolutely, please.
Is that one of the odd things about making like your first film, your first feature, is that you have to have the conviction to do things the way you want to do it, even if it's not necessarily the way it's usually done. Does that make sense? And I was super keen that we have a rehearsal period, but it wasn't what I'd think of as a traditional rehearsal period with, like, you take the actors to the location and kind of stand around acting scenes out. What we did is we had a little kind of conference room in London, and we just sat in a circle with the script. And we literally went through the script, scene by scene, spoke the scenes out, went through word by word, and was like, okay, what do you mean when you say you can't leave me alone like this? Where's that coming from? And I'd explain what I thought that one line meant. And then Fiona would give her opinion, and maybe she'd change it and be like, I'll tell you what, actually, if I'm going to say that, maybe I could say, you can't leave me. That's all I need to say. And I'd be like, okay, great. That works. And Jason sat with me, and we went through the script word by word and changed dialogue, and then wrote it up overnight and went in the next day. And basically that process was all about making the actors feel like the characters were part of their creation as well as ours, that they were part of the process. And I think one of the reasons that the performances feel so authentic in it is that we gave the actors the opportunity to have their say, and they didn't change scenes or plots, or the beginning of the scene, the end of the scene stayed the same, but the way that the dialogue changed, and the way that a single word changing the whole scene can pivot on that, really was a bit of a revelation, really. And I think it made a world of difference.
How long did you have for that?
Not long enough, but about 2 weeks.
Oh, okay, that's great. Wow, for a 20-day shoot.
So we had about just over a week in London in a conference room, and then about a week in Ireland.
That's a lot. That's a lot, and that's fantastic.
I had to beg. It was a bit of an ordeal to try and organize, but it was definitely worth it.
Look, it paid off, man. Those performances were great. Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you to check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. We're going to publish our long-delayed pandemic issue pretty soon here, issue 42, and there's a lot of cool stuff in it. We've secretly been publishing our news stories in issue 41 as well, because it was out, and as movies were coming out, we wanted them to go in there, but building a new issue and publishing a new issue, we're still doing an issue 42, and there's stories that were not included in issue 41, of course. Some of them have just been interviews that happened this week, as a matter of fact. And there's going to be a lot of great stuff in there, so I hope you check it out. It has definitely been a challenge to run a film magazine during a pandemic, but we're getting by. We're doing the best we can. So your support means everything to us. And because of that, I want to give you a coupon code if you'd like to join us. SAVE5. That's the word SAVE and the number 5. You could use that over at backstory.net, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. You'll have access to our archive, which right now, we're getting ready to publish issue 42. I think it goes back to around issue 30. It got zapped. We have to rebuild it one article at a time for every single issue. So it's a bit of an endeavor, to say the least. But we're continuing to update it with new old issues as we continue to produce new content as well. So, it's a very 2020 thing that we're doing. We're burning the candle on both ends. But look, your support will mean everything to us. Thank you for considering subscribing to Backstory Magazine. Of course, I would be remiss if I didn't remind you to also go out there and see Joe and Jason's film Kindred. They are podcast listeners who've made it into the podcast as guests now. So it would be great to support them and to support independent cinema as well. So please make sure to go out and rent Kindred, which was just released. And now let's get back into our conversation about Kindred with Joe and Jason. Back to your coverage for a second. What were you doing to get out of focus some of the things in the background? Were you using Vaseline on your lens? Were you using a shaved lens?
That was just, so this is when my weird pretentiousness comes into full effect, so bear with me. I am a big believer in whatever the theme of the film is, it needs to infect all the different departments of the film, Yeah,
that's legit.
So if we're dealing with a film that is essentially about trust and manipulation, then you want to make sure your props and your art department and your wardrobe are all taking that into account. And so with the camera, the idea I came up with was that, before she gets into the house, in any scene in the first act and a half that isn't set in the house, we shot on a spherical lens, right? So like a round-faced lens, like this webcam lens that I'm looking in, like a normal lens, because a normal lens like that is designed to represent reality, right? So what she is experiencing in those moments is reality for her. Therefore, that's what the audience is seeing. and we crop it to 235 to anamorphic, so it looks the same as anything else. But then when we get into the house, we're shooting on anamorphic lenses, and not just like modern Cooks. They're like vintage Hawk anamorphics, so they're like really wonky, and they have crazy distortion in them, and the edges vignette, and they're amazing looking. They're like superb. But the thing about anamorphic lenses is that they are a manipulation of reality. You're manipulating the image in order to tell the story you're trying to tell.
Yeah, that's smart.
So in a kind of slightly wonky, pretentious kind of way, it meant that the outside world is a world of reality, and the inside world in the house is a world of kind of deception, if that makes sense. So the anamorphic stuff is, maybe to the normal person, the layman wouldn't tell the difference. It just looks like the same kind of thing. But I think subconsciously, hopefully, the audience will tell. But basically, that's those.
Oh, yeah, you could see the difference. I mean, so yeah. I was just curious if you put Vaseline on the lens or if it was something like that. But it was just the lenses. Yeah, that was great.
They've seen better days.
No, that's great.
I mean, I'd always, particularly if you're shooting with modern, like, we shot an Arri, but with Alexas and whatnot, I prefer the softness of vintage lenses just because they can be a bit too sharp otherwise.
Yeah. How many cameras did you shoot with? Okay, that's what I thought.
Only one. Always only one. Apart from the crash at the end, which technically we had 3 on.
Sure. It's a money shot. You have to.
But no, just one.
Obviously, I'm sure Jason was around. Were there any rewrites that you needed to do during production? Did you find yourself rewriting anything?
So yeah, go on, Jason. That's a good story.
Well, yeah, there were. I mean, I seem to remember, Joe, whenever you were in Ireland, we were still rewriting stuff.
There were a couple of scenes that were problematic kind of throughout, and it was like a lot of the time it was not that it's Jack himself, but it happened to be scenes with Thomas in that were like problematic because he's the glue that bonds things together, and getting the level of exposition right is really hard, and you trying to work out whether to almost shoot 2 different versions of a scene or alternative lines of dialogue so that you can change it in the edit, and it became a bit of a kind of like a jigsaw to try and work out how to do it.
Okay. Was there anything in particular?
Jason was only out for the last kind of like
last
5
week,
days.
was it, I think? Yeah.
Okay.
And tell them about rewriting that scene in the car.
Well, I mean, I basically came on to set for a holiday. As far as I seem to have a bit of a look around and enjoy myself. And I think there was one day we were in the house, and Jack was really keen to try and rework something. And I remember, Joe obviously had so much on his mind. He was kind of like, but there's just not enough time to write it. I don't know when we'll get it done. And then he suddenly looks at me, and I'm like, oh, here it comes. He goes, Jason's there. He can rewrite it. And I was like, oh, great. So then I was ferried off with a laptop into a corridor somewhere in the house. And as I'm trying to rewrite this scene, I've got like people standing over my shoulder, and they were having a discussion about how difficult writing was and who would want to be a writer. So that was because, they were looking at me, and they were probably thinking, oh, that guy's under pressure, and it must be hard. So, so that was my experience on set.
That's funny. Did the scene end up okay? It was Jack in the car, basically?
Yeah, it was pretty much that. It was the scene at the end after Tamara has cut herself and he's driving her to hospital.
Okay.
And they're trying to get that balance right between how much he says about what they've done to her and whether they've drugged her or not. What Jason isn't telling you is the person standing next to him was Saoirse Ronan, the actress.
Yeah. Because
her and Jack are in a relationship. So she was on set most of the time we were out there. She's super cool. She's really nice.
She's very talented. Obviously,
she's in the film.
Huh?
She's in the film. You can have that as a Jeff Goldsmith podcast exclusive.
Wait, where? Where?
she's very out of focus.
Okay.
There's a scene, it's in the trailer, where Tamara finds out she's pregnant, and she goes and has a glass of wine in the pub. And you can see her stood at the bar, and the guy's pouring a glass of wine. And in the background, there are 3 out-of-focus blobs. And that middle blob is 3-time Oscar nominee Saoirse Ronan.
Nice.
And even more impressive, another blob walks past the window, and that's co-writer Jason McColgan.
There you go. Well, so, editing's the last stage of storytelling. What did you learn about your film most in editing? Was there anything that you wished that you would have added to your shoot? Did you need any reshoots to get out of like being in a bind of having that very, meticulously well thought out approach to your coverage, which locked you in, or was editing smooth?
No, I think it was a blessing and a curse that we had no resources for reshooting anything. It was like we kind of had what we had. So we had to make it work. And the funny thing is, I remember reading a thing with Scorsese, and he was like, if you don't want to puke after you see your first assembly, you're not doing it right, And Fiona, my editor, was cutting throughout the shoot. She was in London. We'd send the stuff back over the net, the proxies back, and she'd be editing those. So I saw an assembly like 4 days after we wrapped. And, I thought it was okay. I was like, it makes sense. It was 3 hours long or something insane, and it needed redoing. But I always felt fine. I remember the first time I showed anyone, we showed, I shouldn't say who, and they looked at me like I'd just run over their dog in my car. I was just like, it's not that bad. Jesus. But it was about an hour over length, and we'd only been working it for about a week, I think, at that point. That was a slightly depressing day. But no, I think the edit I found quite pleasurable because it was like a nice kind of therapy session, getting over the traumas of the shoot.
Well, there's a good pacing to the movie, like she starts off pregnant at their house and she has the baby by the end of the movie, and you don't feel like you're waiting for it. Time is confusing the audience as much as it's confusing her, which I know was part of the design, where it's moving really fast. So your pacing was good. Was there anything that you hated to cut, but that you had to cut, like a deleted scene you want to tell us about?
Not really. I think the only scenes we cut were her not falling down the stairs because it wasn't dramatic enough. And there was quite a cool scene with the keys, with Fiona and Tamara scene. But it came too soon after Margaret's monologue. It felt like it just felt like a repeated beat in a weird kind of way. So that went. But they're not good enough that I would put them on a DVD or anything. They're just like, if they didn't make the cut, they're not good enough. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. How important was transition in your writing when you guys write? How important is transition and thinking of those kind of things? Because I know some of the dream sequences, getting in and out of those, but there were a lot of very well thought out cuts that I could easily see happening on the page. Sometimes they're thematic, going from scene to scene as well.
I think I was a big fan of Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene.
Love that movie.
And I think that the transitioning they did in that was a big inspiration for me. And so basically whenever I could find a fun transition to do, I'd try and do one, And so we did write them into the script, Joe, didn't we? We did.
They very much were.
Yeah. Okay.
I wasn't particularly that conscious of it. I think for me it was just more. I just sort of went on instinct. What felt right.
All right.
Yeah, they were all in the script.
I also admire that there were basically, for the most part, no jump scares. Mm-hmm. You did like what I think that they're referred to as like a supernatural parlor drama of sorts. It's your setting, it's your mood. You have the scary family in the scary old house, and they think that they're just perfectly normal, but they're of course batshit crazy. So it's just like you handled that line a lot without jump scares for the most part. So I commend you on that as well. Like anything that was scary and disorienting and weird was just that. It wasn't relying on an edit to do that. So
I think again, a big inspiration for me with that kind of thing was Park Chan-wook and Bong Joon-ho movies. And I think that particularly like Mother, the South Korean version, not the Aronofsky one, I think that's like one of my favorite films. And what that film does incredibly well is kind of toys with genre, and it is scary and slightly violent, but it's also quite sweet, and there's a really lovely relationship in it. And then at the same time, it's like, I don't know, it's slightly freaky and odd, and it's really funny, like laugh out loud funny in places, and similarly, Old Boy, as grotesque as it can be when the guy's cutting his tongue off and whatnot, you never thought it would be funny when someone tries to eat a live octopus, but it's kind of quite charming when you watch it.
Yeah.
And I think it's films like that inspired me, that are like, it's not one kind of genre, I'd like to think when people see Kindred, there's like, albeit it's a bit of a cheap laugh, but you know, I don't think a lot of people want to eat quiche for a couple of days after they see it.
Right. Well, tell me this. Tell me this. When you were designing that ending, how long do you think she's trapped in the hospital for? Have you thought about what would happen next in that situation?
I think I'm a big believer in. I had a big discussion with Jack and Dom about this when they were saying that like maybe we fade her out too soon, her shouts, and maybe we should hear it when Jack's walking down the corridor singing. We should still hear her. But I felt really strongly that if we did that, it felt cruel. You know, it felt like we were lingering on her suffering in a weird way. And I know it's maybe a bit odd because we're only talking about 4 or 5 seconds difference. But for me, there's a very clear transition of the point where her journey in the film finishes and you start a new journey in the film. You know, it becomes a really weird version of 3 Men and a Baby, you know? And so as far as I'm concerned, her film is over. You know, I haven't really thought beyond that.
Okay. All right. Jason, same thing?
Yeah, no, exactly the same thing. And I just never really gave it that much thought. It was more,
All right.
you know, that it was kind of like well, this is where we leave her. Do you know what I mean? And because of that, I didn't really think beyond it.
Well, so what was your toughest scene for each of you? What was your toughest scene on the page, Jason? And then Joe, what was your toughest scene on the page and as a director? And how did you creatively rise to the challenge to solve the problem? So no pressure on Jason, starting with you.
Well, there was a few. I think we had sort of discussed it. You know, like that scene that I had to rewrite on set in the car. That was troublesome. But I always remember the one that really struck me right from the very beginning was whenever Thomas is sort of explaining about his father and all the rest of it. That took a lot of rewriting, and it was a really difficult balancing act with exposition, but also getting that information across, and then, you know, what was the backstory, and, you know, what it should be and how it should work, and like I say, then trying to impart that without it being too obvious. So that was a tricky one for me, for sure.
Joe, on the page and then directing it.
We had to shoot. It's a very weird quirk of fate that we had to shoot all the stuff outside the house first. So we had to shoot everything in the hospital, in these 2 wings of this hospital we set up. And then the week before the shoot, they were like, oh, you can't use one of the wings, actually. You have to only use one wing. So the maternity ward, the A&E department, the scene at the end are basically the same 3 rooms painted differently. And you wouldn't know as an audience member, but it was quite stressful. And in the middle of it, we had this quite a big chunk of dialogue between Thomas and the doctor outside the doors, you know, in the corridor. And we cast this lady, Nairi, who is in a big soap opera in Ireland as like a kind of runaway single mother, sometime drug addict, kind of daytime TV kind of soap opera actress. And she's incredibly talented when it comes to giving her pages. She can just remember it like crazy, just like, oh, here's a page of dialogue. Okay, got it. Next, you know. And I had to go to her hotel the night before and give her like 4 pages of dialogue and be like, look, I hate to do it to you, but this is all changed. Can you do this tomorrow? You know? So she came in and she totally smashed it, and we shot it all. And when they'd finished, we cut inside the room and had Charlotte banging on the door. And as soon as I turned over on that shot, I was like, I'm not going to use any of what Nairi was just saying. She just stayed up all night learning.
What was she saying? What was it about?
Oh, nonsense. Like
a psychological condition?
Like, yeah. Like, you know, it wasn't as bad as that bit at the end of Psycho where he's like, what do you mean he has split personality? like some guy explaining, you know, psychosis or whatever.
We wrote that a lot, didn't we? We rewrote that an awful lot.
And I was quite pleased to get rid of it, frankly.
Right.
And
Joe, what was your most difficult piece on the page before you were even on set? The scene that you were sweating every time you came back to?
I think that scene in the car, we've mentioned it before, of driving to the...
Okay.
After she's cut herself and we're trying to get to the doctors. And it's like, how specific do we have to be about if they've been drugging her, what they've been drugging her with, what's her reaction realistically? Because I'm a big one for authenticity. You know, you want my pet hate in movies is when people do not act the way that people would act in real life.
Yeah.
And I was really keen in this film to try and get people to act in a more authentic way. And if someone tells you in the back of a car that they've fucking been slipping you roofies, you know, like, how are you going to react to that? You know, and it's just like, that was a bit of a
well, and he doesn't say exactly what he slipped, so it still leaves the kind of paranoid side available for being valid, you know, in which maybe he wasn't slipping anything that dangerous, but he says that he basically, the way that you left it was, he basically says something along the lines of, well, the doctors are probably going to ask some questions. So, and then we actually never hear the end of it. Actually, you know, there was another scene. I know what it was. It was Jane. I called her Julie earlier. When she attacks Jane in the car, when Jane comes to get her, she punches her in the face. And you don't give us the dialogue. It plays over music. And I actually thought that although that could be a stylistic trick, it actually worked well here, because I'm not sure what the characters could have said that would have helped the audience. But what gave you the idea of doing that, of editing it out?
Well, I have to give a massive big up to my editor, Fiona. Because when I came back from the shoot in the first assembly, she had cut that scene 2 different ways, and she cut it with the dialogue. And there's a bit, it tends to happen a lot in horror movies. Again, I probably shouldn't name names. It's really bad. But
don't name names, but just give us a situation.
You get a lot of films, especially horror films, which end up with like quite long scenes of people pretending to be out of breath, or people randomly shouting. And it just does my head in. You know, I'm just like how much heavy breathing can one man listen to, you know? And it got to the point where it just felt a bit repetitive, what they were saying, you know, and it was dragging out a bit. And it would have worked, and we'd have made it work. But Fiona was like, see what you think of this, and had cut a version to music. And it just suddenly was a kind of like a breath of fresh air, you know, it suddenly kind of took a life of its own. And that's one of the things about directing, you know, you have to know when to listen to other people's opinions and to give people a chance to have a say. And she really kind of, and also I would say about Fiona is that one of the reasons that I went with her is that she edited The Little Drummer Girl, the Park Chan-wook show. So she knew her South Korean movies. So, you know, I had faith in her.
It was good. I mean, she did a great job editing. The movie looks fantastic. And again, earlier going back to Thomas Drugging, I got to say again, Jack's performance was amazing. And it was really the childlike nature that he did without being creepy, scary, but childlike damaged is kind of the way that I would describe Thomas. Yeah. And it's a nuance that if he missed it, it would not have worked. But he nailed it, man. Like, so you see that character could be capable of anything once you know that the innocence also hides a murderer, and you wonder what else he's done that he doesn't consider to be murder, you know? So anyhow, well, look, you guys have been very generous with your time. What's next? What are you guys working on next?
So, I mean, the funny thing is, you know, like I said before, we are both kind of starting out on this journey in a weird way. I've just got an agent in the States, but I still don't have an agent in the UK. Jason hasn't got an agent at all.
Really?
So yeah, man. Yep. You'd be surprised. Like, if you don't know anyone in the industry, it's like it's not the easiest thing, you know, finding the right people. So So we're starting the journey. I've got a film vaguely in development. We've just gone to some casts called Uncle, which I wrote with our friend Evan. I've got a couple of other completed scripts that I think are half decent. So I've got some stuff lined up. I just got to find the right people to do it with, really.
That's great, man. That's awesome, Jason.
And then Jason.
Yeah, sort of likewise for me. I've got a few scripts that I'm eager to try and get made. Basically, one that I've written with Owen as well, weirdly, which is a complete departure from this film. It's more of probably a young adult type Goonies-esque thing set in London. So there's that. So cool. I'm keen to get that made if I can. But and then there's a couple other scripts as well. But we'll see.
That's great. That's great. Well, it's always great to have podcast listeners in the podcast. So I think that's awesome. And look, you guys had a great first film, and I can't wait to see what you do next. So Jason and Joe, thanks for hanging out today.
No worries. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
A real pleasure.
Appreciate it.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Thanks again so much to co-writer Jason McColgan and co-writer director Joe Marcantonio for coming down and chatting about their film, Kindred. And look, because these guys are podcast listeners, I hope you search out their film and go rent it, because that's really important as well. And of course, while you're surfing around online, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You could test drive us and read our free issue. You could also use our coupon code SAVE5, that's SAVE and the number 5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. You could read us on a desktop, laptop, or even our iPad app. And your credentials that you get by just subscribing on our website will work in the iPad app as well. We are just getting ready to publish issue 42, our pandemic issue, which is really important to us. It's been long delayed and very difficult, I got to say. So your support means everything. Thanks for considering subscribing to Backstory Magazine. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2020. All rights reserved. If you want to find me on social media, you could reach out to me at Yo Goldsmith on Twitter, or of course, Backstory_mag on Twitter as well. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.